Acting wasn't just pretending. It was expression. It was release. It was art. And she loved it. She stepped back and looked at the wall again. Instead of taking the pages down, she straightened them, smoothed them, then pinned new ones next to them. Not because she wanted to rehearse the same way, but because she wanted to do it differently. With more balance, with more awareness. As she worked, she heard a soft ding from her phone. She walked to the table and picked it up. A message from the building's group chat appeared. "Thank you for the pastries." "That was so kind." Another read. "You didn't have to, but it was delicious." And another. "We should all get to know each other more often." She felt warmth spread across her chest. She replied with a simple message. "I'm glad you liked them. Thank you all again for everything." She set her phone down and stepped into the living room again. The space looked brighter somehow. The sun hit the wall just right, making the pinned pages glow a little. She sat down on the couch, letting the softness embrace her. The morning had passed, and the day felt promising as she relaxed. She thought about how much had changed in such a short time. The fear, the confusion, the misunderstanding, the kindness, the connection. All of it had shaped her differently. She realized she didn't feel alone anymore, not like before. She felt connected, if just a little, to the people sharing the building with her. She knew that life didn't always make sense. Sometimes things happened suddenly, without warning. Sometimes people misunderstood each other. Sometimes fear came before understanding, but sometimes something good came out of it. She looked at the wall again, the same wall that had caused so much confusion, now filled with lines and notes that looked peaceful, even inspiring. It wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a reminder that life could shift in a moment. A reminder that people cared more than she thought. A reminder of how small moments could open doors. She took a slow breath and let it out with a soft smile. The day felt new. Her heart felt open. And her life, quiet, simple, unexpected, felt like it had changed for the better. Without thinking too hard about it, she whispered to herself, "I think everything is going to be all right." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. The moment the officers stepped back from the center of the living room, the woman felt a small breath finally escape her chest. Even though no one had said anything clearly, she could sense the tension shifting. It was not gone completely, but it was softer, less sharp, like the air was slowly settling after a heavy storm. She noticed the way one officer looked around the room with narrowed eyes, not in a threatening way now, but as if he was trying to understand something that didn't fit the picture they expected. Another officer lowered his flashlight, letting it hang loosely at his side. She could tell they were confused, and in a strange way, they seemed just as unsure as she was. She stood near the edge of the room, trying to keep her breathing steady. The morning light slipping through the curtains made a warm line across the floor, and it almost felt strange that something so normal existed in a moment like this. She had woken up expecting a simple, quiet day, but instead, her home was filled with people she had never met, all dressed in heavy uniforms. Moving with practiced caution, one officer finally broke the silence. He had a calm voice, deeper than the others, and his eyes didn't carry the same intensity they had when they first entered the house. He asked her if she could walk them through the rooms again. Not because they doubted her words now, but because something still didn't add up. She agreed, trying to hide the small shake in her hands as she gestured toward the hallway. They followed her slowly, their steps heavy but not rushed anymore. She opened the door to the small guest room first. The space looked untouched, just a neatly made bed, a shelf with a few books, and a side table with an old lamp. The officer closest to her scanned the room quietly before giving a small nod. Then they moved to the kitchen, which still smelled faintly like the tea she had made earlier. One officer checked behind the pantry door, another glanced under the small dining table. The soft clatter of utensils in the sink made her feel oddly exposed, as if even simple things were being inspected with careful eyes. They headed toward the last part of the house, the room she used the most. This room was different from the others. The walls were covered with pinned notes, scribbled lines, highlighted words, and sheets of paper that looked like pieces of something bigger. The officers paused at the entrance, not because they felt danger, but because the room looked unusual compared to the rest of the house. One officer tilted his head slightly as he took in the sight. The woman stepped into the room first, gently moving aside a stack of papers. She explained in a slightly embarrassed tone this was where she worked on her community projects, specifically the event she had been preparing for. She pointed at the notes on the wall, trying to show how everything was part of her planning. But she could see confusion on the officers' faces. Not all of them seemed to understand what they were looking at. The officer with the calm voice took a step closer and read one of the sheets pinned near the center. It had bold, emotional lines written across it. Lines that could easily sound frightening if someone heard them without context. He took his time reading it, then read another and another. His expression changed as he pieced things together. It wasn't shock or suspicion now. It was a realization. He asked her gently if she had been practicing these lines out loud. She nodded, admitting that she had been rehearsing late into the night because the event was only days away. She didn't think her voice carried far enough for anyone outside the house to hear, but now she wasn't so sure. She told them she didn't use a microphone or anything loud, but sometimes she got deeply involved in the emotions of the scenes. That part she couldn't deny. Another officer, one who had remained mostly quiet since entering the house, stepped closer to the wall and read the lines silently. He didn't say much, but his subtle reaction told her he understood. The words she had pinned weren't random. They were dramatic, emotional, and full of tension. Exactly. The kind of lines that could easily sound like someone in trouble if someone walked by at the wrong moment. The calm-voiced officer turned back toward the others and exchanged a look with them. It wasn't a full conversation, but the shift in their faces made it clear they were beginning to understand what happened. The calls they responded to, the urgency, the fear from the neighbors. All of it now made sense in a completely different way. He asked her if she had been alone all night. She said yes. She had been sitting right here, going through each line, trying to get the tone right, trying to feel the moment so she could deliver it well during the event. She didn't even realize her voice might have echoed through the walls or carried to the backyard where others might hear. One officer ran his fingers along the edge of a paper pinned on the wall, careful not to pull it down. He told her softly that some of these lines sounded intense. She nodded again, feeling her cheeks warm slightly with embarrassment. She explained how the event involved storytelling and dramatic scenes, and how she really wanted to give her best performance. She had been practicing daily, getting deeper into the feelings behind each word. The calm officer let out a slow breath. The kind people release when they finally understand something that didn't make sense before. He asked if she could show them where she usually sits while practicing. She pointed to a small chair near the table. The table had papers spread out, a cup with pens, a notebook with long paragraphs written in her handwriting, and a small glass of water she had forgotten to finish. He stood near the chair and looked around, trying to imagine how her voice might have traveled through the space. He asked if her windows had been open last night. She looked toward the far window and realized it had been open just a little, enough to let in cool air. She nodded. That detail seemed to confirm what he had been thinking. He told the others that if she had been practicing these lines near the open window, anyone walking outside or living close by might have easily heard parts of the scenes and with no context. It could have sounded like a real argument or an urgent cry for help. She felt her shoulders drop slightly as she realized how it must have sounded to others. The officers exchanged calm, relieved looks now. The tension that once filled the room had fully faded. One even gave a soft, understanding smile. They weren't upset. They weren't frustrated. They were simply relieved that no one was in danger and that the situation had an explanation that made sense. But even with the relief settling in, the woman could still feel the leftover nerves inside her. She couldn't believe her late-night practice, something she thought was harmless, had led to officers rushing into her home with so much urgency. She kept thinking about how the neighbors must have been scared if they truly believed something terrible was happening. The quiet officer finally spoke for the first. He told her that sometimes misunderstandings like this happen, and people call because they care. They don't want to take risks when they think someone might be in danger. His tone wasn't blaming her. It was comforting. reminding her that the intention behind the calls had been good. Early morning light was just starting to slip through the thin curtains when a soft knock echoed in the quiet apartment. It wasn't loud at first, almost like someone lightly tapping by mistake. She was still half asleep, sitting at her small kitchen table with a warm cup of tea cupped in both hands. Her mind was still slow, trying to wake up fully. She didn't think much of the knock. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe someone pressed the wrong door. Things like that happened all the time in the building. But the second knock came harder, faster, more demanding. She blinked, get confused, and set her cup down. Something felt off. The air seemed heavier, like the walls themselves were waiting for something. She stood up slowly, listening to the hallway outside her door. For a moment, everything fell silent again. She thought maybe she imagined it. Maybe someone was knocking somewhere else. Then a voice thundered through the door. "Open the door?" "Police." Her heart dropped. She froze in place, not sure if she had heard it right. "Police, why? What for?" Before she could even take a step toward the entrance, the knocking turned into heavy pounding. Firm, unhesitating, as if whoever stood outside already knew. They would not wait long. She rushed to the door but stopped just before touching the handle. She felt her hands shake. Her breath grew shallow. She wasn't hiding anything. She hadn't done anything wrong. But the intensity of the banging made her panic. It felt like something serious, something urgent. "Please open the door now," a different voice shouted. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her mind scrambled for explanations. Had there been some misunderstanding? Had something happened in the building? Maybe they needed information from residents. She unlocked the door, her fingers trembling, and pulled it open just a few inches. What happened next happened too fast for her to understand. The door swung completely open as several officers rushed inside, their boots thudding loudly against the wooden floor. She stepped back quickly, startled by the sudden movement. Her small living room seemed even smaller with the officers in it, moving in quickly, scanning everything with urgent eyes. "Step back, please," one of them said firmly. Motioning her aside, she obeyed, still too confused to speak. Her heart pounded so hard, she could feel it in her throat. Two officers headed straight toward the hallway that led to her bedroom, bathroom, and small storage room. Another stood near the kitchen entrance, watching her while speaking into a small radio clipped to his shoulder. The rest spread out with practiced coordination, checking corners and opening doors. "What is going on?" she finally asked, her voice small and shaky. "Ma'am, stay where you are," the officer near her repeated. Though his voice had softened just a little, she nodded, even though her whole body was tense. Fear kept her rooted in place. She kept trying to think, was this really happening? Why her home? What could have caused this? Her mind raced with every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. She lived a simple, quiet life. She worked from home most days. She didn't bother anyone. She wasn't involved in anything that would draw police attention. The officers finished checking the bedroom and bathroom and returned to the living room. One of them shook his head, signaling that the rooms were empty. Another officer stepped forward. "We received multiple emergency calls from this address," he said. She stared at him, trying to understand the words. "Emergency calls," she repeated. "I didn't call anyone. I didn't even touch my phone this morning. The calls weren't from you," he said. "They were from neighbors. They reported shouting, 'Distress, possibly someone in danger.'" Her confusion deepened. "Shouting here?" She looked around her quiet apartment. There wasn't a single sign that anything unusual had happened. The officer nodded. "They described loud yelling, maybe an argument. Someone might have thought a violent situation was happening." She shook her head slowly, feeling a mix of disbelief and frustration. "I was alone all night. I didn't shout. I didn't argue with anyone. I don't even have visitors." The officers exchanged looks, their expressions shifting from tension to uncertainty. One of them stepped toward the living room wall, where pages of handwritten lines, highlighted notes, and little paper tabs were pinned haphazardly. "Ma'am," he said, looking at the wall closely. "What's all this?" She followed his gaze and felt her face warm with embarrassment. "Oh, that? It's just something I'm working on. A small project. For the community center." She rubbed her hands together nervously. "I've been practicing some scenes. Mostly late in the evening because it's the only quiet time I have." An officer raised an eyebrow. "Scenes, as in acting," she nodded. "Yes, it's for a small event. Nothing big." She felt awkward explaining it with so many officers staring at her. "The lines get emotional, but I didn't think anyone would take it the wrong way." "Did you practice last night?" one asked. She nodded again. "Yes, for a few hours." Several officers exchanged another look. This time, understanding began to settle in their eyes. The officer near her crossed his arms lightly, his tone gentler now. "Some of those lines, were they loud? Emotional? Maybe someone hearing it through the walls could think it was real?" She hesitated, then let out a small breath. "Some lines are very dramatic, I guess. Maybe they could sound like someone in trouble." "I didn't think about that." One officer walked closer to the wall, reading a few lines pinned there. His expression softened immediately. "I think we just solved the mystery," he murmured. She stood quietly, feeling both relieved and embarrassed. She watched as the officers relaxed, their posture less strict, their tone less urgent. "Ma'am," another officer said, "we had to respond quickly." The calls sounded serious. "But I think this might just be a misunderstanding." She nodded, understanding their side even though the morning had shaken her completely. "I'm sorry if I caused any confusion. I didn't realize my practice sessions were so loud. It's all right." "Better safe than sorry," one officer replied. Another added, "Maybe just give your neighbors a heads up next time. Or try rehearsing a bit earlier." She smiled nervously. "Yes, definitely." The officers slowly began to gather near the door, some speaking into their radios, calling off the response. A few offered polite nods before stepping out. The tension in the room faded with them. She stood there for a long moment after the last officer left, still feeling the echo of their footsteps in her quiet home. Her heart was finally calming down, though her mind was still foggy from the shock. She walked toward the wall covered in notes and lines, staring at the dramatic dialogue she had practiced the night before. She ran her finger along one of the highlighted sentences and laughed softly under her breath. All this, because of a script. She picked up her tea, now cold, and sat down again, breathing slowly. It would take time for the morning's surprise to settle, but one thing she knew for sure, now her acting might be a bit too convincing, and her walls. Much thinner than she ever imagined. The apartment had finally gone quiet again after the officers left. But the calm didn't last long. Even though the door was closed and the morning light felt gentle now, there was a strange heaviness still hanging in the air. She stood in the center of her living room for a few seconds, trying to collect herself. Her heart had slowed, but her thoughts were still scattered everywhere. She tried sitting down, but her legs were still shaking. So instead, she walked toward the window and looked outside. The building across from hers looked normal, curtains still drawn, balcony still empty, laundry hanging like nothing happened. But she knew some of the neighbors had probably been awake earlier. They had heard something. They had thought something terrible was happening. She felt a small wave of embarrassment. She had never imagined that practicing her lines, just a simple hobby, could cause so much chaos. She remembered how loud she had gotten during one emotional scene the night before. She had repeated the same line at least 10 times, each time trying to sound more natural, more real. She didn't realize she sounded too real. She decided she needed something warm to calm her nerves. She went into the kitchen and poured herself another cup of tea. This time her hands were steady enough to hold the cup without spilling. She took a deep breath and sat back at the table, trying to slow her thoughts. But as soon as she took a sip, another thought hit her. If the neighbors called the police, it meant they truly believed someone was in danger. That meant they were listening. They had heard every bit of her dramatic voice. Maybe they even heard her pacing, stomping softly during one of the emotional scenes. Maybe they misinterpreted everything. She felt her face warm again. She tried to tell herself it was just a misunderstanding, nothing more. The officers understood now. They weren't angry. They even seemed relieved. But she knew the neighbors wouldn't know the full story. They only knew what they thought they heard. She sighed deeply and rested her forehead in her hands. She didn't usually interact much with the people living around her. Not because she didn't want to, but because everyone in the building kept to themselves. People were polite, but distant. A simple hello in the hallway was often the most she and her neighbors exchanged. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe if they knew her better, they wouldn't have imagined something so dark happening inside her place. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she needed to clear things up, not just for the police, but also for the neighbors who must have been terrified. She didn't want anyone thinking something dangerous was happening right next door. She stood up from the table with a sense of determination she didn't expect to feel so soon after such a stressful morning. She walked around the living room again. The pages pinned to her wall fluttered slightly when she passed by, almost like they were reminding her of everything. She touched one page and took a deep breath. Maybe she really had taken the rehearsals a bit too far. She heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter. She hadn't checked it during the entire incident. She walked over and picked it up. There were several unread messages in the building's residents' group chat. Her eyes widened. Messages like, "Did anyone else hear something last night? I think something serious is going on in the building. Police outside. Stay inside your apartments for now." And finally, they went into someone's place. "I hope everyone is safe." She closed her eyes and let out a long breath. She appreciated that the neighbors cared enough to be alert, but she also felt a sting of guilt. She had never meant to scare anyone. She wasn't even sure how to explain this without sounding silly. She placed the phone back on the counter and decided she should at least tidy up the living room. Maybe doing something physical would calm her nerves. As she collected the pages from the floor, some had fallen when the officers moved around. She found herself smiling just a little, remembering the officer's reaction when he read one of her dramatic lines. The way his expression softened. The way they all slowly realized what was happening. It was embarrassing, yes, but strangely also a little funny. After picking everything up, she stepped into the hallway and opened her apartment door just a crack, checking if anyone was around. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No whispers. No curious neighbors waiting by their doors. She stepped out carefully, locking her door behind her. She didn't plan to knock on anyone's door yet. She just needed fresh air. She made her way toward the stairs, moving quietly. The building always smelled faintly of detergent in the morning. Today was no different. When she reached the ground floor, she pushed the building door open and stepped outside. The sunlight felt warm, which was the first truly comforting thing she had felt all morning. She stood there for a while, breathing slowly.
Ow.
Even though she was outside, she still felt the weight of everything that happened. She could still hear the knocking in her mind, the loud commands, the sound of boots moving across her floor. After a few minutes, she made her way toward the small bench near the entrance. She sat there, letting the quietness settle around her. But just as she was beginning to relax, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned slightly and saw one of the officers from earlier walking out of the building, still speaking into a radio. He spotted her immediately and walked over. "Are you doing all right now?" he asked. She nodded, just trying to recover from the shock. It was a lot. "I can imagine," he said with a sympathetic smile. "We didn't mean to scare you, but we had to move fast." The callers made it sound urgent. "I understand," she said. "Just caught me off guard." "Misunderstandings happen," he replied, "but I think things are clear now." She gave a small laugh. "I guess I should be more careful with my rehearsing." He laughed softly too. "Either that or tell your neighbors you're practicing for an award-winning performance," she smiled, appreciating his attempt to lighten the mood. The officer's radio crackled lightly, and he glanced at it, closing the case as a false alarm. "You're all good." "Thank you," she said sincerely. He nodded, gave her one last reassuring smile, then walked toward the police car parked a little down the street. She watched him go, a strange mix of relief and lingering embarrassment swirling inside her. When she finally returned to her apartment, the rooms looked different, not physically but emotionally. She felt like the space had witnessed something heavy, even though nothing truly dangerous had happened. As soon as she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it and took another deep breath. That's when she heard something she didn't expect. a soft knock. This one wasn't like the police knocks. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. It was gentle, almost hesitant. She straightened quickly, her heart skipping. She walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was her neighbor from 2 doors down, holding a cup of warm soup. I just wanted to check if you're all right, the neighbor said softly. We were all worried. In that moment, her embarrassment melted away just a little. Because behind the worry, she could see something simple and sincere - kindness. And for the first time, since the chaotic morning began, she felt truly grounded again. She stepped aside slightly and smiled gently. I'm okay. Thank you for checking. The neighbor smiled back, and for the first time in months, the hallway didn't feel so distant. Maybe this misunderstanding, as stressful as it was, might bring something unexpectedly good with it. Maybe this was the start of something new, something warmer, something a little more human than the isolated life she had been living. And in that moment, she realized the morning wasn't just frightening, it was eye-opening. She closed the door softly after the neighbor left, holding the warm cup in her hands. Her apartment still felt quiet, but for the first time that day, quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt hopeful. The rest of the morning moved slowly, almost as if time itself was trying to calm her down. After the neighbor visited with the cup of soup, she felt her heart lighten a little. She placed the cup gently on the table, still surprised by the small gesture. It wasn't much, but it meant more than she expected. For the first time since she moved into the building, she realized that maybe people did notice her, even if they didn't say much. She sat down and took a small sip of the warm soup. The simple taste grounded her. It reminded her she wasn't as alone as she thought. The morning had been stressful and confusing, but now, little by little, things were settling back into place. After finishing half the soup, she stood up and carried the cup to the sink. She washed it carefully, feeling a strange sense of calm as the warm water ran over her hands. When she placed the cup aside to dry, she looked around her kitchen, noticing for the first time how quiet everything was. Too quiet? She walked to the living room again, her eyes landing on the pinned script pages on her wall. Some were crooked, others hanging loosely, and a few had tiny tears at the edges. They looked messy, nothing like how she usually kept them. But after the morning's chaos, they were the least of her concerns. Still, something inside her felt uneasy. Not because of the police incident anymore, but because she knew something bigger was coming. A part of her sensed that the misunderstanding wasn't completely resolved. There were still questions she needed to answer, not just for others, but for herself. She took a seat on the couch and stared at the wall, trying to understand why everything felt so overwhelming. She had practiced her lines many times before. She had worked on performances for small community events in the past. She had never caused a problem. So why now? Hey, why did this particular project feel different? Remember the script again. It wasn't a light-hearted one. It had deep emotions, heavy moments, and lines that demanded energy and intensity. Maybe that was why things escalated. She didn't realize how loudly she had rehearsed. She didn't consider how thin the walls were. But there was something else. She hadn't been herself lately. She had poured too much of her own frustration and stress into the lines. She had used the script as an outlet, letting emotions fill the room at night. Maybe the neighbors weren't wrong to worry. After all, they only heard the intensity without any context. She stood up again, pacing slowly. Her footsteps were soft, almost gentle, as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. She didn't like feeling restless, but her mind simply wouldn't settle. After a while, she went back to her window. People were now walking along the street below, heading to work or running errands. Children were waiting for the school bus, laughing and chatting. Everything looked normal out there. And she wished her morning had started just as simply. But she also knew things didn't happen without a reason. She leaned slightly on the window frame, thinking about her neighbors. She didn't know most of their names, and she doubted they knew hers. The building community was distant, not unfriendly, but disconnected. Everyone was busy with their own stories. Maybe that's why the misunderstanding felt heavier. She wondered if the neighbors were talking about her now, if they were still worried or confused, If they were thinking about the loud lines they heard, she didn't want anyone to feel uneasy living next to her. After a few more seconds of silence, she stepped back from the window. She walked toward the wall again, touched one of the pages, and gently pulled it down. The paper felt thin and slightly worn. She smoothed it out with her hand and whispered the line quietly. It sounded softer this time, more like a thought than a performance. She continued taking down a few more pages, not to discard them, but to rearrange them. While she worked, she tried to focus on simple movements, straightening, pinning. Each small action helped her feel more steady, but halfway through, she heard another knock. This one was very light. She froze for a moment, her breath catching. She didn't want another surprise. Not so soon, but she walked slowly to the door and opened it. Standing in the hallway was a different neighbor, a quiet older woman who lived directly across from her. She was holding a small plate covered with foil. "I hope I'm not bothering you," the woman said softly. She shook her head. "Not at all. Is everything okay?" "I just wanted to drop this off," the woman replied. "You must have had a very stressful morning. I thought something warm might help." She held out the plate gently. She stared at it for a second, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful of you." The woman smiled kindly. "We were all worried, you know. The noise last night. We didn't know what was happening, but I'm glad you're all right." She nodded and lowered her eyes slightly. "I'm sorry for worrying everyone. It wasn't my intention. I was rehearsing lines for an event. I didn't think it would sound so loud through the walls." The woman's expression softened. "I understand, and it's all right. We just wanted to be sure you were safe." The sincerity in the woman's voice eased something inside her. It felt good to be understood, even just a little. She thanked the neighbor again and went back inside. She placed the plate on the counter and sighed. The kindness she had received twice now made her realize something important maybe. This incident wasn't just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a moment that revealed how much people cared, even when they didn't show it every day. She sat down again, feeling a mix of relief and reflection. She couldn't remember the last time she spoke to any of her neighbors for more than a polite greeting. Maybe she kept too much distance. Maybe she was too wrapped up in her own world. But today she finally saw that people around her were willing to connect. All it took was an unexpected moment to bring them together. She took a deep breath and decided to do something she never did before. She grabbed her phone and opened the building's group chat. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, but then she started typing. "Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say I'm okay. The police were here because of a misunderstanding. I was rehearsing lines for an event, and the noise must have sounded alarming through the walls. I'm really sorry for worrying anyone. Thank you for being alert and caring. I appreciate it." Read the message twice before hitting send. Her heart beat fast as she waited for reactions. A minute later, the messages started coming. "Glad you're safe. No worries. Better to be careful. We were really concerned. Take care. Thanks for clearing it up." She felt a smile tug at her lips. People weren't upset. They were relieved. A few more minutes passed. She received a private message from one of the neighbors she had never even spoken to. "If you ever need help with anything, don't hesitate to message. We're here." She stared at the screen for a moment, touched. She placed the phone aside and looked around her apartment again. The space felt different, lighter, warmer. Maybe it wasn't the room that changed. Maybe it was her. Her thoughts were interrupted by another soft sound. Not a knock this time, her stomach growling. She hadn't eaten since last night, and the morning had drained her energy. She laughed quietly to herself, decided to warm the food the neighbor had brought. She removed the foil and found a small portion of rice and a simple homemade curry. It wasn't fancy, but the smell alone brought comfort. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the kindness behind it. After finishing, she washed the plate and set it aside to return later. Then she sat on the couch again, feeling calmer than she had in hours. Her eyes drifted to the script pages still on the wall. They looked less intimidating now. She leaned back, thinking maybe she should continue practicing, but more carefully this time, not because she was embarrassed, but because she finally understood how her actions could affect others. She picked up one page and read the lines softly again. This time, it didn't feel like she was performing. It felt like she was healing, and she realized something. This morning's chaos had pushed her into the lives of others and brought them into hers. It had forced her to look beyond her small world and see the people around her. Maybe that was the truth she needed. Not the one pinned on the wall, but the one unfolding in her life. She took a deep breath, looked around her apartment, and smiled. The day had been strange, stressful and overwhelming, but in a gentle, unexpected way it also felt like a new beginning. The next morning arrived quietly, without any loud knocks or surprises. Sunlight slipped into her room in soft lines, warming the air and waking her slowly. She opened her eyes and lay still for a moment, listening to the peaceful silence. It felt good. It felt normal. After everything that had happened, she appreciated this calm more than she ever had before. She sat up slowly, stretching her arms as her mind drifted back to yesterday, the police rushing in, the confusion, the neighbors checking on her, the messages in the group chat. So much had happened in so little time. It felt like her life had shifted in a small but meaningful way. When she got out of bed and stepped into the living room, she paused. The wall full of pinned pages looked different now. Not because she had changed it much, but because she no longer saw it the same way. Yesterday, it felt like the cause of everything. Today, it looked like a reminder of how unexpected life could be. She walked toward the kitchen, made herself tea, and sat by the small table near the window. The tea warmed her hands, and the quiet let her thoughts settle gently. For a long moment, she just stared out the window and watched the street below. A delivery man rolled a cart of boxes into a nearby shop. A couple walked together, talking softly. A cat stretched lazily on a sunlit wall. Ordinary scenes, but somehow they made her feel grounded. She took a slow sip of tea. She felt ready to face the day, ready to step out of the confusion. Ready to move forward. After breakfast, she decided to take a short walk outside. She grabbed her coat and keys, slipped on her shoes, and headed to the door. Before leaving, she glanced back at the living room, at the wall, at the space where everything had happened. Then she stepped out. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and someone's freshly brewed coffee. She smiled at the familiarity of it. When she reached the stairs, she noticed something surprising. The older woman who had brought her food yesterday was standing near the railing, holding a potted plant. "Good morning," the woman said kindly. "I was just going down to place this outside. The weather's nice today," she smiled back. "Good morning is nice. I was planning to take a walk too." They walked down the stairs together, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt warm, like they had already crossed the first step toward knowing each other better. When they reached the entrance, the older woman paused. "Are you feeling better now? After everything?" She nodded softly. "Yes, much better. Thank you again for checking on me. It meant a lot." "I'm glad," the woman replied. "We're neighbors. We should look out for one another." That sentence settled warmly in her heart. She had never thought about community like that before, not deeply. Now it felt real. After the woman left to tend to her plant, she began her walk down the street. The fresh air felt good, clearing the last bits of stress from her mind. She walked slowly, appreciating every small detail around her: the soft breeze, the warmth of the sun, the distant laughter of children heading to school. She passed a bakery and smiled when the sweet smell of fresh bread reached her. She felt a sudden idea forming in her mind. Maybe she should do something for her neighbors in return. Something small but meaningful. She stepped inside the bakery and bought several small pastries, neatly packed in a couple of paper bags. Then she headed back home, feeling oddly excited. When she returned to her building, she paused at the door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. She walked up the stairs, holding the bags carefully. Her heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but because she wasn't used to taking the first step and making connections. At her door, she placed the pastries on her table and began preparing small notes. Just simple thank you notes. She kept the words short and honest. "Thank you for checking on me yesterday. I truly appreciate it. Once the notes were ready, she placed each one inside a paper bag with the pastry. Then, she carried the bags into the hallway. Her plan was simple. Just leave the treats by the doors of the neighbors who had reached out or expressed concern yesterday slowly. She walked down the hallway, placing a bag in front of each doorway. When she reached the last one, she took a deep breath and smiled. It felt good. It felt right. When she returned to her apartment, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. She closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet embrace her. Her eyes drifted toward the pinned script. Pages again. She walked over to the wall and stared at them. For a moment, she considered taking everything down, maybe even stopping altogether. After all, her rehearsing had caused so much trouble, but then she remembered the officer's kind smile, the neighbor's warm visit, the messages from the group chat. She realized something important. It wasn't the acting that caused a problem. It was forgetting the world. Around her, she touched one of the pages gently. Running her fingers along the lines, she whispered one sentence softly. It didn't sound dramatic this time. It sounded real, honest. The comm officer asked one last time if there was anyone else in the house just to complete their duty fully. She shook her head. He nodded with satisfaction, as if checking off the final step in his mind. Then he stepped back, giving her space for the first time since they arrived. She stood quietly, looking around the room, at the papers pinned on the walls, at the notes she had worked so hard on. She realized that something so ordinary to her had seemed alarming to others. It was a strange feeling, knowing her passion had accidentally caused so much confusion. The officers slowly made their way back, toward the living room. She walked with them, feeling much lighter now. The atmosphere was calm, not rushed, and no one seemed tense anymore. Before heading toward the door, the comm officer turned to her and assured her that everything was fine now. He even let out a small, friendly laugh as he said they didn't expect to walk into a house filled with dramatic dialogue on the walls. Another officer added that she might want to let her neighbors know the next time she plans to rehearse late at night, just so they don't worry again. She agreed, smiling a little, despite the stressful morning as the officers prepared to leave. She watched them with a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Moments ago, they had entered her house with full urgency. Now they were walking out calmly, understanding exactly what had happened. The sunlight coming through the front window made everything look normal again, as if the morning had reset itself. When the door finally closed behind them, the house felt quiet once more. She stood there, letting the silence settle around her. She never expected her practice to reach anyone outside her walls, but now she knew how easily things could be misunderstood. She looked toward the room with her pinned notes and took a slow breath, already thinking about how she might explain the whole situation to her neighbors later. And for the first time since the officers arrived, she allowed herself a small laugh. She had spent days practicing dramatic scenes for the event. Yet it was her real life that had turned into the most unexpected scene of all.